money. It's like I feel like the Swifties is like a pyramid scheme, like a multi-level marketing. It's like which kind of regional boss are you? Are you buying 15 of these bad boys? Or are you just a little lowly employee on the totem pole and you're buying five of them?
Which part of the organization do you work in? Which the Tortured Poets department? Is that where you're from?
Yeah.
I'm from HR.
And you know
You're in a
what? I'd
lot
be
of trouble.
Hello, welcome back. It is week 144 on Out on That Line. I'm Jeff with my co-host Alex. Alex, how you doing this week?
Well, Jeff, I got me a new camera, and I got to tell you, the way that it's set up, I really like the we are coming to you live from the underground kind of stuff that you can do with it. I may parlay this into a side hustle as a right-wing outrage peddler.
Mm-hmm.
TBD. But until then, I'm feeling fine, Jeff. How are you doing?
I'm doing very well. Just got back from a little vacation up into your neck of the woods. It was a great time. Came back to the Texas heat. Was not very excited about that. Stepping onto a jetway that is literally dripping condensation from the inside of the walls is not a fun time, folks. Do not recommend. Not one bit.
Yikes. We call that the terrarium experience.
Yeah, it certainly felt like I was in one. If I was properly irrigated and planted, I probably would have sprouted.
Nice. That's a nice little metaphor for self-esteem.
Yeah. Well, this week we got a couple things to go over here. So we are going to talk about Pearl Jam. Let's talk about Eddie Vedder and crew and their new album, Dark Matter. And first of all, how much Pearl Jam do you listen to in general in your everyday life?
In my everyday life, I've listened to a lot of Pearl Jam. I would say lately, I haven't really been feeling the grunge kind of stuff. I haven't listened to Dirt in a while. And they're
Okay.
kind of different flavors of grunge, but Dirt is I eat a lot of dirt. It's a steady part of my
Yeah.
diet. And I haven't been listening to it lately. It's been a different vibe. But in general, I would say I'm a Pearl Jam guy.
Okay, that's good to know because I certainly am as well. One thing I will say about Pearl Jam, and I think this album kind of serves as a good example of that, is that they've aged with their music, and I think that's like kind of the wisest thing you can do when you're in a rock and roll band is to it nothing like that Rolling Stones album. That's such a perfect example of what not to do. Is like nobody honestly believes that 147-year-old Mick Jagger is really going out there, staying up past 10 o'clock and pulling himself some 25-year-olds. Like it's not,
For the fit bird.
yeah, it's just not something that I believe happens, and it's not believable when they sing about it. I think the good thing about Pearl Jam has always been just their willingness to do something weird, that the lyrics don't have to make sense to you. They made sense to them, So I think what I've always loved about them is the energy. And for some reason, there's certain bands that, they play rock and roll. They're great, but they just don't give me any sort of like, yeah, let's go get pumped up or get me angry or feel any sort of like real emotion. Foo Fighters, a great example of that. Like that's exactly the kind of music I should love. And I just don't because it just doesn't feel like it has anything to provide for me more than the surface level tasty riffs. And that's like good the first time and doesn't really offer anything. It's not very filling. You're hungry pretty soon after that. Pearl Jam is the kind of band for me that's always been very fulfilling, both in the energy, the riffs, like the stuff that I want, and the emotional content. And that's where those two roads meet for me, is really the perfect place in music. So Pearl Jam, even their early stuff, the Versus album, 10, Yield, like all those albums had classics on them. One of my favorite songs by them, one of my favorite songs ever, Corduroy, on the Rearview Mirror album, and I think it's on an earlier one too. That's kind of a compilation greatest hits type of deal. Really, really, truly great song. Given to Fly. Absolutely fantastic song. They do such a great job with these big epic rock songs. They can play punk music. They do these little acoustic jobbies, and they've always been very versatile and kind of good at everything. So I'm curious what you thought about the new album, or kind of what your familiarity is with them in their more recent albums.
The more recent stuff was really only a dabble because and this will speak to this album too. I also love Pearl Jam for the energy. I think 10 for me is the one I've listened to the
Mhm.
most. And the song that weirdly of all of them, like really exemplifies kind of what I think their ethos is Jeremy. The
Oh
story
yeah.
in that is so dark and it's so dark, too hot for YouTube. You talk about it,
Yeah.
you get shadow banned. Um, but it's this like really dark, and you know, the idea of below the neck authenticity, like writing about these things because these are things that are happening. You know what I mean? Like that was a time in society where that was still a fucked up thing. We've become so like horribly anesthetized to when, you know, these kind of, you know, shooties happen. I don't know how to say it without getting around YouTube stupidity.
Yeah.
But you know what I mean? Like it and it's not just that, but it was the same thing that like Nirvana was doing where it's like you're speaking to these larger societal issues that nobody really gave a fuck about at the time.
Mhm.
And there was a lot of anger and there was a lot of outrage and there was a lot of like writing about things they loved and people they loved. So I liked that young, pissed off, but like philosophical, thoughtful, very much like reflecting its times. Like
Mhm.
the energy of it is just unmatched. You put on
Yes.
anything on 10 and you're gonna run a U-shaped hole through the wall.
Yeah.
So for me on this one, I think the musicianship, like you said, the smart move was age with your music. The only downside to that for me is now you're a bunch of 50-year-old men, maybe even almost 60, I don't know. But
Mhm.
you're a bunch of old men and you don't have the same things to rage about. And I'm not saying you're out of touch,
Yeah.
but they just don't have the same things to rage about and the same way to go about it. They've lived a lot of life since then. So it changes the flavor of the music only in the sense that I think kind of my issue with this album is some of the songwriting is pretty toothless from a like lyrical and
Mhm.
thematic standpoint.
So I would say that is generally the main criticism of more recent Pearl Jam. Now, I still liked this album a lot. I think there was a few songs though that represent exactly what you're talking about. I think the one "Waiting for Stevie," not great. There's whereas
Yeah.
the I think it was "Upper Hand." I think that was the one I was. Yes, the so that one, maybe it's not. I have to like look into the lyrics deeper and figure out which one, but there was a couple of them that were like the sound was right, sounded like Pearl Jam, everything was good, but the lyrics were a little bit too linear. I think a little too simple, a little too like surface level, the kind of thing
Mhm.
that they didn't do before. Now it's happened here and there on these more recent albums, and it does happen back on those earlier albums. Far less often though. Um, my one of my favorite albums by Pearl Jam is Backspacer, and I would consider it more in like the modern era of Pearl Jam. In that, I would say probably anything like 2005 and later. I would consider that. So that has some great songs on it. It has your slower songs that are really heartfelt. Just Breathe is on there, one of their best songs they've ever done. I'm pretty sure. They really do make an incredible album, and the problem with this one, I think, is exactly what you're saying. Is like there's some times where those lyrics don't feel as strong or as pointed as Pearl Jam lyrics usually do. And it's enough that those songs that it happens on, I think, really takes me out of liking those songs. I don't think it gives me a negative view overall of the album. I think overall I'm still really positive on it, because they do still have some of those kick-ass songs like Running. They do still have some of those like punch you in the nuts and get going songs.
Yeah, I think for me, the ones that kind of typify what didn't work about this was the kind of like boilerplate ones. Musically, they're pretty straightforward, and then lyrically, there's nothing like Dark Matter, no tolerance for intolerance, or no patience left for impatience no more. It doesn't really have like the
Mhm.
scope and the grandeur that maybe you'd hope from what would have been interesting to me. And again, you're getting into like, well, that's what you would have done, but it's not what they were interested in. But if this was like the Wrestling with Mortality album, you know what I mean?
Mhm.
And you put a lot of that below the neck authenticity into it, because this just felt, I don't mean to be cynical about it, but it did feel kind of like Pollyanna-ish writing at certain times. And
Yeah.
don't get me wrong, they always sound like they're having fun. They're tight as hell, and the good songs really, really land. And I'm overall like not super down on
Mhm.
this, but like, I mean, react, respond. The light gets brighter as it grows. The darkness, it recedes. Like, that's bland, that's
Yeah.
boring, it's generic, it's vague. Plus the song itself sucked shit. That was the worst one on here. That was the worst one on here by a country mile.
Yeah, it was what the first time I listened through, I was like, oh, I didn't like that one that much. Maybe once I listen to the rest and come back to it, it'll like make sense. And then listen to it again. I was like, yeah, they could have left that one right off there.
No, it was like a Serge Tankian fever dream. It was
Yeah.
not "Act, respond." I don't know what they were doing on that one.
Yeah.
But like you get something like Upper Hand for me was like
Mhm.
sonically the grungiest one. And I hate to be that guy that's like play the old stuff. But there's something about being able to successfully mix in that very recognizable sound and using it, sparingly. It's not a gimmick at that point. Like Upper Hand,
Mhm.
that sound really fit. And the scorching guitar work by Mike McCready.
Yes, it was.
What the fuck?
It was Won't Tell that I was thinking of that I was like, that was not very good. Upper Hand, I don't know how I got those two switched in my head, but the Upper Hand, that solo.
Phew. Yikes, that should come with a trigger warning.
Yeah. Yeah, that was, and I think that was one of the, I remember seeing the interview before the album came out with Eddie Vedder, and he said, I wanted to focus a lot on getting like a little bit different sounds. Like there were definitely kind of intros to songs where Pearl Jam would never do that sort of thing before, where it's like this kind of ambient, sort of windy noise almost, and then it gets into the song, and it's like not something you really heard them do. So I liked seeing them start playing around a little bit. I think letting the guitar rip a little more like they did on this one than they did on previous albums. Lightning Bolt was a pretty decent album. I thought Backspacer kind of blows it out of the water, and I think I still do like Backspacer more than this one. I think it's just stronger top to bottom with each song. But I don't think Pearl Jam has totally lost their fastball on this one.
No.
I think there's plenty here that people are really going to like. And if you're already a Pearl Jam fan, and I think people might not realize like how dedicated a fan base like Pearl Jam has in general. Like they have, I don't think they're at the level of like the Swifties where they're going to threaten to create like a mob and kill somebody if they, or unalive somebody, I guess. Might have to bleep that if they, if they say they're bad. Like the Swifties got so angry when The Weeknd remained the number one artist on Spotify. Like they were like, that's a fraud. I mean, just like insane behavior. Um, but I really do appreciate that Pearl Jam is still like trying. Like you can tell there's still so much effort, so much care like put into creating these songs, writing about things that he really does care about. It's just I think the things that he cares about are not things that piss him off anymore. And I think it's when he's at his strongest as a songwriter, it's when it has that rage and it has that like I've got something to fight against kind of energy. So I feel like if they leaned more into like the political stuff, they could probably find that again because I know they definitely disagree with a whole lot of what's been going on in the last probably 20 years, 30 years in the country. Um, I think if they tap into that, maybe that's an avenue where they can get a little bit of that bite back in some of these places where it was lacking. But I do think where they found the groove and found the old like Pearl Jam kind of rage and almost going off the rails kind of feel, it was really, really successful in those parts. I think just overall, not quite successful enough for me to be a buy it. So I'm going to say stream it. And if you're already a Pearl Jam fan, you're probably going to love it anyway.
Yeah, I think it's again, the quality of it overall is not in question, and like you said, they haven't lost their fastball. That's not what this is for me. Because you get something like Wreckage, which is like the concept of an older Pearl Jam with a recognizably signature sound. These two things like coming together in a very satisfying way
Mhm,
where it's clean and it's bright, but it's also like that grungy, the attitude of it is grungy, which I
mhm.
like. Like it Wreckage is a song. It's a weird song. It's got like a Bruce Hornsby-esque
Yeah.
kind of piano to it and these like jaunty backing vocals. But Eddie Vedder, it's a vocal showcase for him. He's swinging for the
Mhm,
fences. He's one of my all-time favorite vocalists.
mhm.
He's ruined my life because you try to imitate him and you sound like an idiot. You sound like you're making fun of him.
Yeah,
Daddy!
it's when you imitate him, you end up sounding like the guy from Creed.
Yes, and you don't want that. You don't
No.
want that.
No, you certainly don't, but it's
Don't fuck
it's
around.
to me, this is a good album. To me, this is like Letter to You by Springsteen versus, like, Born to Run, which would be their, like, 10 or their Versus album. So I think if you look at it in context of the length of their career, the fact that this album is still as good as it is, I think is way more a testament to how strong they still are than you can make any criticism about
Yeah, it's the only real criticism is a subjective criticism. Of course, this book that I just read, What It Sounds Like.
it.
Ever heard of it? I only mentioned it the last 3 weeks. But, you really do realize, like, doing a show like this, how impossible it is because everything in music is so subjective.
Mhm.
It's so completely subjective, so what I didn't like about it could be what someone loved about it. But for me, it really was the songwriting didn't like, it didn't come together as a record because the songwriting wasn't fully there, like, the instrumentation, the music, fantastic. It was some of the subject matter and the lyrics that didn't stick it for me, and it doesn't tank the whole thing by any means, but it makes for an uneven experience because on things like Upper Hand or Gotta Give, you gotta give. They get more candid about certain things, but not even like all the way. Like I really would have liked to have seen that. I guess you wouldn't call it a midlife crisis if they're almost 60. But it had that, like, like, the Mortality album is an interesting
Mhm.
thing for me that I hope we get at some point because they, like, edged up against it in a couple places here, and that was what was most interesting to me.
Are you
So
saying
it
you want
was
Pearl Jam to die?
I'm saying Pearl Jam's gonna die. That's not a threat, it's a fact. And
That makes it sound like more of a threat.
listen, that's not if I really wanted to threaten someone, you think I'd do it so nakedly. I I guess I just can't call this like an essential Pearl Jam album
No,
to me.
no.
It's solid. So I for I would call it inessential, solid, good little album. Let's be condescending about it. A good
Yeah.
little album. It's a good little album. Yeah, stream it. Why not? If you're a Pearl Jam fan, like you said, you're listening to it already, and
Yeah,
that's probably who that's for. So stream it.
yeah. And I mean, I think it's good that Eddie still can bring it vocally.
Hell yeah.
I mean, the registers dropped like slightly, but that's just from aging. Like he didn't lose any power or any ability to like control it. I will point people to that Backspacer album if you do want to hear kind of a later on Pearl Jam, and probably came out 20 years ago at this point, or almost like close to that. Um, like fantastic album, and I think their older stuff. If you haven't listened to Rearview Mirror, that's probably the best representation of Pearl Jam. If you want like the whole gamut of their acoustic songs, their like rockin' moving songs, that's got a huge amount of them. Elderly woman behind the counter in a small town, daughter. I mean, there's just so many good songs in that one. Corduroy's on that one. Given to Fly is on that one. Um, they're just excellent. They've been excellent for a long time. I was hoping this one was going to be a little stronger, but I think it still deserves to stream it. I'm glad you felt the same. I was a little worried you might think that those songs that were not good were going to bring it down enough. I was getting nervous that I was going to have to like die on my shield here for Pearl Jam.
No, no, they didn't even get close to a Tanqueray. I think the first listen through, I texted Tanner after, and I was like, "Boy, that was not good." And then I listened to it a bunch more times, and I'm like, you had some kind of weird bias going when you went into that. I don't think you thought a new Pearl Jam at almost 60 years old could be good.
Yeah.
Not necessarily that they would lose the magic per se, but it's the question I had, which is like, what do you get to say? And I don't need you to go back to being pissed off punks, but like, what do you have to say?
Mhm.
And this felt like a very surface level, stranger on a train kind of level of introspection.
Mhm.
You know, life's not bad. The donuts are big and the coffee's hot at work, and it just didn't. It wasn't as engaging as I think I would want
Yeah.
people with this much musical and life experience and fucked up stuff.
Yeah.
So there's a lot that I would have liked to have heard from them that just didn't come through. And so again, musically, you can't ding this one,
Yeah.
but overall, it just didn't completely adhere for me.
Yeah, and I wish, more than anything on this album that they had written a song about forgetful podcast co-hosts, because if they did, they might include some lyrics like, you can find the rest of our content at youtube.com/C/out on that line. If you're looking for those sweet, tasty reaction videos or those delicious little scrumptious singles videos, those are on there. If you're wondering about any of our past episodes, you want to look into the recipe book, it's all back there. Hit that subscribe button. Make sure you comment down below. You tell us what we want to hear. Oh, sorry, what you want to hear. Tell us you love us.
Tell us what we want to hear.
Yeah, tell us what we want to hear. /C/out on that line. Thank you.
Wait, am I the forgetful podcaster?
I wasn't gonna throw any stones or name any names, but if you got a guilty conscience,
Then that one's on me. And until next time.